All right. So, welcome everyone to our first fall 2024 PAS meeting. My name is, for those of you who don't know, my name is Erin Frigo. I am president of the Panhandle Archaeological Society, and our special guest speaker tonight is Dr. Michael Jordan from Texas Tech University, who is planned to talk to us about his research titled From the Battle of the Washita to the Red River War, 19th Century Southern Cheyenne and Kiowa Narrative Art. Just a fun fact, Dr. Jordan was on my thesis committee and one of my former professors at Tech, so fun things. Also, he has shared with me a flyer. I put it in the chat. There's been a lot of updates in the chat, so you might have to scroll down. But I have put the flyer in the chat for, where is it? I thought I put it in there. Is it in there? Yeah, okay, there it is. For the Battle of Paladuro on Saturday, September 28th. So at this time, please turn off your speakers, and if you think you're going to be like moving around a lot, maybe turn off your cameras as well. This is just to minimize interference and any distractions and make everything go as smooth as possible. And with that, I will give the floor to you, Dr. Jordan.
Thank you so very much. Well, we're very proud of Erin, and so it's a pleasure to join with you tonight. I want to thank Scott and Erin for the invitation to come and talk about my research. I'm really excited to be able to share this with the members of the Panhandle Archaeological Society. I'm at Texas Tech. I'm a research associate with the Denver Museum of Nature and Science and a research associate with the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. This year, just really quickly, as Erin was mentioning, there's an event coming up on Saturday, September 28th at Paladuro Canyon State Park, and that's a memorial dance that Texas Tech and Texas Parks and Wildlife Department are co-sponsoring along with the Comanche Nation, the Kiowa tribe, and the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes. And so that's an event that will be marking and commemorating the 150th anniversary of the Red River or the Battle of Paladuro Canyon. And it's part of a larger series of events that Texas Tech is hosting this year. Our Humanities Center theme is celebrating Indigenous resilience, commemorating the Red River War, and honoring the vibrancy of Native American history and culture on the Southern Plains. So if you want to check out the TTU Humanities Center website, we have a list of upcoming talks. Dr. J. Brett Cruz spoke on campus Wednesday and then last Wednesday. And then we've got a number of other events coming up, including guest lecture with Vanessa Jennings and Summer Morgan, Kiowa artist, as well as a hand game exhibition in November. So feel free to check out the flyer in the chat and to check out the TTU Humanities Center website for a list of upcoming events that might be of particular interest to this audience. Well, tonight I want to basically focus on three things. First, I want to place Plains narrative art in sort of its cultural context and talk about why men were creating these drawings. I want to examine a few drawings that depict battles or engagements associated with sort of the latter half of the 19th century on the Southern Plains. So we're going to look at drawings related to the Battle of the Washita, as well as several of the Red River War engagements. And then finally, I want to think about what these drawings can teach us about the way in which Kiowa and Southern Cheyenne people conducted warfare and the attendant rituals and ceremonies that went along with that. And so in the process, we'll also examine the material and expressive culture associated with warfare. So if you're kind of wondering what's the connection between these drawings and archaeology, part of it is that these drawings really give us a window into what people are wearing in the material culture of Southern Plains people in the latter half of the 19th century. And then there are also depictions of battles that have been in the subject of archaeological investigation. So either through the Texas Historical Commission's Red River War Battles Project or more recent investigations that Scott and Chris Larson have done. So I want to start off talking a little bit about what is Plains narrative art. And so some of you may already be familiar with the term the Plains biographic tradition. So as academics, we consider these drawings to be part of the Plains biographic tradition. And these are depictions of men's accomplishments, and particularly their martial achievements or war deeds. And they have a narrative quality. They're telling a story. They're recounting an individual's experiences, focusing on his war honors. And the Plains biographic tradition spans a number of mediums. So we have pictographs, we have petroglyphs, we also have drawings on hide. So we have teepees that have war deeds emblazoned on the cover. We have teepee liners. We also have bison robes. And so we have work both pictographs and petroglyphs, as well as works on hide, and then also as well works on paper. You're probably familiar with the term ledger drawing. That's a bit of a misnomer. That term gets applied to these drawings and Plains drawings in general because some of them are executed on the lined pages of account books. And so one Smithsonian conservator who was characterizing the materials that the warriors used described it classified them as discarded office supplies, right? In some cases, they're books that are captured. And so Castle McLaughlin has talked about this idea of war books, which I think is a really important concept where Plains men are capturing books and then over the English inscriptions, drawing their deeds, right, and sort of placing their deeds over the written word. So because of that, a lot of times this term ledger art gets applied to these drawings, even if they're not actually on account books. So why do scenes of warfare predominate? And there's a couple reasons. The primary one is that male status in Plains societies is predicated on one's martial prowess, on one's war deeds. This is how men competed with one another for social standing. And these war deeds are ranked roughly. And so things like counting coup, if you've heard that term before, which refers to striking an enemy either with the hand or an object held in the hand, then even counting coup was ranked. The first person to touch an enemy, first coup, that counting first coup counted more, right? Was more prestigious than counting second or third or fourth coup. And depending on the tribe, they recognized three to four different individuals could count coup on an enemy. Capturing an enemy's weapon was another war deed. Rescuing a comrade whose horse had been killed or wounded or had become winded. These were all war deeds that were sort of recognized, and men created these drawings to publicize their war records. Right. This was a way of drawing attention to one's deeds. Oftentimes, the performance of certain deeds lent a man certain prerogatives. And so, for example, amongst the Kiowa, the ceremony to open a new teepee is conducted by a warrior who's had entered an enemy teepee to count coup. Amongst the Cheyenne, cutting down the center pole for the Sundance, that prerogative was reserved for a warrior who had struck an enemy with a hatchet. And these drawings serve as mnemonic devices. I gave a talk like this one time, and someone thought I said demonic, mnemonic. So they're memory aids, and so these drawings would jog an individual's memory, and they would narrate it. So it's important that we recognize that these drawings fit sort of hand in hand with these oral narratives that would go with them. We know that war deeds were recounted on certain occasions. These books were passed around in warrior society meetings. Many of the books contain drawings by multiple individuals. And so in pre-reservation books of drawings, warfare is indeed the predominant theme. We see a few courting scenes that draw attention to men's success in the pursuit of women. We see some hunting scenes, but by and large, the pre-reservation and even the early reservation books are focused on warfare. And it's important to note that warfare, that these war deeds are a form of intellectual property. Men own their war deeds, so you could not depict another man's deeds without his permission. And so some of these drawings are autobiographic, some of them are biographic, but what we can be sure of is the fact that if someone is depicting another individual's war deeds, they secured their permission. And so this was the case with the teepee with battle pictures, the famous design that belonged to Little Bluff, the Kiowa chief. And when that teepee would be renewed on an annual or semi-annual basis, they would paint war deeds on the cover, but they're going and getting those men to either paint their own deeds or getting those men to narrate their deeds and grant permission to have them depicted. So they're always sanctioned by the individual who performed the deed. This is a drawing that depicts Zotome, a Kiowa warrior. This is a drawing created at Fort Marion between 1875 and 78. Zotome was one of the 72 Southern Plains prisoners who was incarcerated at Fort Marion following the end of the Red River War. And this is pretty classic because the point that Zotome is wanting to get across here is counting coup on this enemy who's taking shelter in the bed of this wagon. And Zotome is wearing a mountain lion skin bow case and quiver, but he wants us to know he's not using his bow, right? He's not standing at a distance firing at this man. He is actually dismounted and running toward the wagon with his lance to count coup on this individual. And he's contrasting his bravery in using this handheld weapon, using this lance, with the enemy using the carbine or rifle. And so he's making a point that he's sort of had to close the distance with this individual, expose himself to enemy fire in order to count coup on him. And he is also very clear about the medicine, his spiritual power. He's depicted his shield. He's depicted that belted kingfisher, stuffed belted kingfisher tied up in his hair, as well as his body paint. All of these things that are intended to provide him protection. And we see this in Cheyenne drawings as well. Here's a Cheyenne drawing from the Fort Reno ledger. And in this drawing, we have a Cheyenne warrior who's counting coup with a saber. But he's showing us that he has a carbine, right? He has a gun, but he's not using the gun, right? He's using the saber. He's using that handheld weapon. He's riding up to the enemy, exposing himself to the enemy's fire. And we get, this is from the same ledger book, another Cheyenne drawing. But here the person has a rifle, but is using it to count coup on the enemy, right? So the deed that's worth recounting, the deed that's worth publicizing is striking that enemy warrior and exposing oneself to danger, not standing back and shooting with that rifle. So we get a lot of these sort of drawings that focus on counting coup. This is one from what's called the Whirlwind Ledger at the Sam Noble, Oklahoma Museum of Natural History. And here you have a lot of the conventions that we see in Plains narrative art. You can see that this column of troopers has sort of, you can see on the right side of the page all of the hoof prints where they come down and then kind of veer to the left. You can the black things that look kind of like shuttlecocks here are the muzzle blasts. So they're firing as they're riding down the right side of the page. Then they kind of wheel and ride off to the left and are firing backwards. The squiggly things that look like tadpoles are depictions of bullets, right? So this drawing, the point it's making is that this person has sort of withstood this charge and then is counting coup on this wounded soldier there. And so again, not using the gun necessarily to shoot the enemy, or at least that's not what's depicted, right? The focus is on using the butt of the carbine to strike the enemy soldier. And this is pretty common. These are very characteristic of the drawings produced by Kiowa people and Southern Cheyenne people, as well as Arapaho and Lakota people during this time period. I want to talk a little bit about the fact that while these drawings are primarily produced to sort of document one's deeds, right, one's martial prowess, there is an aspect of these in which they function like a religious testimonial. Because, for example, in this drawing, also from the Whirlwind Ledger, you have this warrior who's showing his medicine. He's showing us his shield. He's showing us the stuffed bird tied to his hair, and he's riding toward these wagons, and all of the people in the wagons are firing. You can see all the muzzle blasts. You see the bullets above and behind the warrior. And his horse is shot 4 times, but he comes through unscathed. And I think these are really like functioning as religious testimonials where he's making the point about the efficacy of his medicine, right? He's talking about the power of that shield, the power of his medicine, his spiritual power, and the way it protected him in this incredibly dangerous encounter, right? So although the horse goes down, the rider escapes unscathed. So I think that the drawings often are functioning both as a way to sort of highlight men's deeds, but also as a way for them to sort of talk about the efficacy, the power of their medicine. In terms of drawings that depict specific events, several years ago, the Western National Parks Association gave me a grant to, and if you're not familiar with the Western National Parks Association, those are the folks who run the bookstores in the parks. So it only seemed right that I would get a little portion of the money I spent at those bookstores over the course of my life back. So they provided a grant for me to conduct research on Cheyenne drawings to identify drawings that might be incorporated into interpretive panels and interpretive materials at Washita Battlefield National Historic Site. And so I had the great pleasure of traveling to a number of repositories and archives to look at their Cheyenne drawings. Of course, the thing that we most hoped to find were possibly drawings that depicted the attack on Black Kettle's Village in 1868. And one of the more magnificent pieces that I was able to view is this teepee liner that was commissioned by James Mooney. So this is known as the Cantonment teepee liner, commissioned by Mooney and painted in 1916. And it has numerous battle scenes. And so part of what I was doing was trying to find, is there a scene here that could be the Washita? And it was clear to me that what was going to be depicted would not be necessarily the attack on Black Kettle's Village, but more likely the fighting against Major Joel Elliott's command. And so if you're not familiar with the Washita, on November 27th, 1868, the 7th Cavalry, led by Osage Scouts, attacked Black Kettle's village of Cheyenne. Camped downstream along the Washita were additional Cheyenne villages, Kiowas, as well as Arapahoes. And so when the 7th attacked Black Kettle's village, many of the women and children made their way down the Washita River toward those camps, which the 7th was unaware of. And so they made their way down toward those villages, and they were pursued by the soldiers. And so Major Joel Elliott, along with 17 troopers, including Sergeant Major Walter Kennedy, followed those women and children, hoping to take them captive. And reportedly, Elliott made the comment, "Here goes for a brevet or a coffin." So a brevet being a field promotion for valor, right? And so Elliott and these 17 men go in pursuit of these Cheyenne women and children. What they didn't realize was that all of those warriors at the villages downstream had heard the firing, had heard the commotion, and they were all riding upstream toward Black Kettle's village to come to their aid. And so basically those warriors end up cutting off Elliott's command and annihilating his command. And so I felt fairly confident that if there were depictions from the Washita, it was going to be of the destruction of Elliott's command. So looking at this drawing, there were 2 scenes that I thought might be from the Washita. We have this scene where a warrior's dismounted, and the bows, that's one bow. It's sequential action being depicted, where the warrior's dismounted and he's walked among the dead and the wounded, counting coup on them with the bow. Then he and another warrior are pinning this soldier down, this trooper, and disarming him, taking away his pistol and his carbine. So this is a possible candidate. There's also this drawing in which we have soldiers lying prone. They're firing in both directions as if they're surrounded. And we have this warrior who is riding toward them, who's been shot in the hand, and he's dropping this saber that he was coming in to count coup on them with. either of these could have been, depictions from the Washita, but it's hard to nail them down. Mooney wrote, and I'm sorry, I said 1916. It's from 1906. The curtain liner, TP liner. But Mooney had a really hard time getting these warriors to depict their deeds, and he said at one point, "All the wearisome urging and persuasion in face of threats and opposition to get the soldier battles cannot be estimated." They were really reluctant. These men, even in 1906, were somewhat reluctant to depict these engagements. But Mooney eventually won them over, convinced them that it was safe to do so. So I started by looking at Mooney's correspondence related to this teepee liner, and he says there's 14 scenes, including the Little Bighorn and the Washita. But it didn't let me decide between the two which was which. Going to Grinnell, the Fighting Cheyenne, Grinnell notes that there was a warrior named Roman Nose Thunder, a Southern Cheyenne warrior, who was credited as being the first to count coup on Elliott's command, and that Roman Nose Thunder was shot in the hand. So that seems to fit with this drawing. I then went to the National Anthropological Archives in DC, and they have some preliminary drawings that Mooney commissioned prior to having the teepee liner painted. So these are drawings on paper, and you'll see the one down here that is the preliminary drawing right here, and it's inscribed RN #1. And so we know that this is now Roman Nose Thunder, right? RN #1. So we can identify this scene. Very similar. Here's the preliminary drawing. Here's how it ends up on the curtain liner, and the teepee liner. Here are the soldiers as depicted in the preliminary drawing. Elliott's command ended up taking shelter in a buffalo wallow, and that's where they were eventually overwhelmed. Here's how it ends up on the teepee liner. But then I realized I had seen something very much like this before. And I've looked at probably thousands of drawings, but this is a depiction from the Whirlwind Ledger of Roman Nose Thunder. And if you look at it, here's the buffalo wallow inscribed with the circle. You can see the men's feet, the steps inside. You see some of the soldiers' heads, some of them just depicted with the barrels of their carbines. And here's Roman Nose Thunder coming in, his shot in the hand, dropping the saber, the horse shot in the same places. So this is acquired by a cavalry officer in 1890. We don't know exactly when it was drawn, could have been drawn earlier, but it definitely predates the teepee liner that Mooney commissioned by at least 16 years. So this is the earliest documentation, earliest Cheyenne drawing of the Washita. And if you compare them, here is Roman Nose Thunder on the left as depicted in the teepee liner. He's shot in the hand, his horse is shot in the forehead, and then the left front leg as well. And so the wounds on the horse match up perfectly. So this is one of these are the only drawings that we know of that we were able to find that actually depict part of the attack on Black Kettle's village in 1868. There are other drawings that depict warfare on the Southern Plains. This is another drawing. We don't know the artist. This is drawn by one of the Kiowa prisoners at Fort Marion between 75 and 78, and depicts an engagement between Kiowa warriors and cavalry supporting mountain howitzers. This could be a number of engagements. The number of mountain howitzers, there are 5 depicted in the drawing, doesn't match any of the records we have for engagements. We know that in 1864, when Kit Carson and the New Mexico Volunteers attacked Little Bluffs village at the first battle of Adobe Walls, that they had two mountain howitzers with them. Then we know during the Red River War, at the Battle of Sweetwater Creek, we know Price had one mountain howitzer. There's also an engagement with the Comanche December 25th, 1868, following the Battle of the Washita, in which the Comanche are attacked in the Wichita Mountains by a column that has two mountain howitzers, and the Kiowas come to their aid. So this could be 1864, 1868, or 1874. I very much believe it's 1864. The engagement in at Sweetwater Creek, there's only one howitzer, and the Price's Price's report basically says that the Kiowas had dismounted and were trying to advance on the gun. So I really do think this is 64 with the mounted warriors. One thing to point out, the figure on the bottom whose horse has been struck, you can see the footprints where he's abandoned that buckskin horse. That is a member of the Quetzalcoatl Society. So that's a no retreat sash that he's wearing. It's a very distinctive headdress made of stripped owl feathers dyed red, and then he's got this black no retreat sash on that marks him as one of the leaders of that society. And my guess is that, in the heat of battle, if you've never faced mountain howitzers before, two mountain howitzers probably seems like five mountain howitzers, right? It probably seems, the fire would have been impressive. Other drawings, so here's a detail. You can see the mountain howitzers there and the troops coming up in column to support it. And here is a better view of the Kiowa warriors. So in all likelihood, this is a depiction of that 1864 First Battle of Adobe Walls. We also have drawings. This is a drawing by Atali. He was another one of the Fort Marion prisoners. However, this drawing postdates the prisoner's release in 1878. So in 1880, Atali goes from Carlisle Indian Industrial School, the first Native American boarding school founded by Captain Richard Pratt, who served as the jailer for the prisoners at Fort Marion in St. Augustine, Florida. But Atali goes from Fort Marion to Carlisle Indian Industrial School, and in 1880 he goes to the Smithsonian, and while there creates several drawings. He draws a Kiowa village located along the Washita River, and he also creates this drawing, which when I saw it, I immediately realized is a depiction of the Battle of Lyman's Wagon Train. And so in 1874, one of those five columns that converged on the Southern Plains on the Texas Panhandle, one of those columns is commanded by Colonel Nelson Miles. And on August 30th, he fights the Battle of Red River. And realizes that he's sort of overextended, and he sends Captain Willis Lyman with a small detachment back with 36 supply wagons toward Camp Supply. At Cantonment Creek, they meet a southbound supply train and transfer the provisions to Lyman's wagons, and then they turn back south to meet up with Miles. On September 9th, they encounter the Kiowa, who begin skirmishing with them. And that skirmish goes for 12 miles from the point that the Kiowa make contact with Lyman's wagon train. The wagon train moves another 12 miles south-southwest. And then eventually Lyman corrals the wagons. So if you look up here in the corner, here's the wagons that have been corralled. I think these are likely intended to represent the Teamsters. He had 36 infantry, 36 Teamsters, and 20 cavalrymen with him. But they circled the wagons and then deployed skirmishers to the right rear while they were forming the wagons. And that's sort of what we see here, right? We have this group marching out. Here's another group already formed into a skirmish line. We see Second Lieutenant West of the 6th Cavalry was in charge of the mounted troops. Chris Larson recently I discovered West's diary, which he sent to William Campbell, Stanley Vestal. And in the diary, West talks about the fact that they only had about 12 functioning horses, even though they had 20 troopers. And the numbers match pretty close. Here's 11 yeah, 11 mounted men. West says in one of the earlier in the day, they sallied forth and one of the troopers accidentally shot his horse in the head and killed it. So this matches up very well with what West discussed. And there's Second Lieutenant West there on horseback directing the troops. And then what Atali drew, and he's like 18 years old at the time of this engagement and would have been there. The landscape fits really well when you're out there at the battlefield and you're looking around. This is Kiowa Ridge, which is this ridge that the Kiowa eventually retreat to, and they dig in up there and establish firing positions to fire on the wagon train. And so both the sort of topography depicted as well as sort of the troop movements fit really well with what we know about this engagement, both from Lyman's report, Second Lieutenant West's diary, as well as the archaeology that's been conducted out there. Lyman, the night of the 9th, September 9th, he would actually dig in around the wagons. They would establish rifle pits around the wagons. As soon as the wagons were corralled, the troopers tied their horses inside there. And then this became a siege. And it was a siege on the 10th and all throughout the 11th as well. We know from Kiowa accounts that there were young men who were making these bravery charges. And so they were charging down off the hill toward the skirmish lines and eventually toward those rifle pits. One young man, Boat Tali, Belly Boy, a young warrior about 17 years old, makes 4 charges on the soldiers. At one point, he actually rides between the wagons and the rifle pits. And then turns around and does the same thing and comes back. And he talks about riding, he describes it as riding through like a hailstorm, how many bullets were fired. West's account says that the troops fired 165,000 rounds over the course of the 4 days between September 9th, September 9th to September 12th. And so these men charging in, they were demonstrating the efficacy of their medicine. They were proving their bravery. Later, ICOI Mini Fires, who's a consultant for Hugh L. Scott, talks about the fact that he talks about to ride down with a war bonnet with everybody firing at you alone is equal to counting coup on a live enemy in the midst of battle. So he was basically saying that making one of these bravery charges was the same as counting coup on an enemy. And then he recalled, quote, "A good many people get killed that way. When you hear the volley and see him riding along into the smoke and dressed in his war bonnet, you say, that man is not afraid to die." And so this was a way in which men distinguished themselves. Boat Tali actually gets a new name. He returns from his 4th charge, and Poor Buffalo gives him the name Ottle Tawhane. He wouldn't listen because the men, after he made the first charge, the men tried to convince him not to keep doing this, but he went 4 times. And so it was a way to distinguish yourself. It's amazing to me that, this drawing is made 6 years after that battle. But obviously the events of that day made an indelible mark on Atali because he remembers the topography, he remembers where the troops were. Another drawing that I can't prove it's from the Battle of Lyman's Wagon Train, but I highly suspect it is this drawing by Kobe or Wild Horse, another one of the Fort Marion prisoners. And here he shows himself surrounded by bullets. So this is a Fort Marion drawing. And I think Kobe was reluctant to depict who his adversaries were. And so he depicts himself making this bravery charge, and I think for all of the Kiowa prisoners, all of the Cheyenne and Arapaho prisoners and Comanche prisoners who were there, when they looked at this drawing, they understood what was being depicted, right? Even in the absence of the enemy or the adversaries. One of the interesting things to me is in a lot of Kiowa oral history, when they talk about riding through the troops' fire and how intense the fire is, they talk about feathers being shot out of the bonnet. And that's sort of an indication. So, for example, Boat Tali at Lyman says at one point he's hanging off the far side of his horse, using his horse to shield him from the fire. And he says, I had two feathers tied to my hair. They were sticking up over the back of the horse. And when I came back, I realized they had been clipped off by bullets. In 1864, Stumbling Bear, there's an account of him tying his daughter's shawl around his neck before he rides out to face the troopers. He's going to fight a delaying action and allow his family to escape. So he ties his daughter's shawl around his neck as a reminder of what he's fighting for. And then the Kiowa account is that he's charging again and again against these troopers. And eventually all the feathers in his bonnet are getting shot out, and stuffed inside there he has a magpie. And the account that Sherman Chattelson told me that had been passed down in his family was that magpie seemed to come alive, that the women who looked back to see him, that the wings were flapping, and it was almost as if that magpie that was tied into the crown of his bonnet came alive. So I strongly suspect that this is Kobe's depiction of his own charge at Lyman's. Another thing that is discussed in the accounts at Lyman, as well as at the Second Battle of Adobe Walls, is warriors picking up comrades who become dismounted, right? So if a comrade's horse is killed, if it's wounded, if it just becomes wounded, the bravest thing you could do as a Kiowa, the ultimate war deed was to turn around and rescue that individual and expose yourself to the enemy fire. So here, if you look, you can see the dashed lines that represent the footprints of the man who's wearing the hide shirt and the leggings, and then you can see the hoof prints that kind of come in from the left and then hook back. They're going left to right, and then they turn. And that's the warrior with the red cape on, who's riding back and picking up this dismounted comrade who's being pursued by an army officer, and you can see the bullets that are flying past them. This is something we see in Cheyenne drawings as well. This is a Cheyenne drawing that depicts a man rescuing a comrade. Here you can see the comrade's horse. It doesn't appear wounded. Maybe it's just become winded, right? They're being pursued by intertribal enemies. Men who perform this deed earn the right to ride double when their warrior society paraded. So this is one of those prerogatives. This is one of those ways of publicizing one's own war deeds. So this is another drawing by A. Tali, the same individual who drew the depiction of the Battle of Lyman's wagon train. And here we have this warrior society parading, and this man has taken up another man behind him to ride through camp, which means he's performed this deed of rescuing a fellow warrior. Here's another depiction. This is from a book of drawings created at Fort Marion. When I was recataloging all the drawings from Fort Marion, this one originally was, teepee with a goat tethered to it. It would have to be a flying goat, right, to be tied up there. But what we know, if you start looking, well, this is a depiction of Big Bow's tail picture teepee, Zape Koye's tail picture teepee. We know Zape Koye was the leader of the Adulta Yui, or Young Mountain Sheep Warrior Society. So this is a name glyph, and it's a name glyph not of the individual who owned the lodge, but of the Warrior Society who was meeting inside this lodge. And here we've got two members of the Warrior Society riding up double. In terms of other drawings, I really suspect that this is a depiction of the Second Battle of Adobe Walls. I can't prove that, but I really think it is. When you look at sort of the length of the guns that the individuals have inside, when we think about the buildings and how close they were, Hanrahan's Saloon and Tom O'Keefe's blacksmith shop are only 35 feet apart. We know that, there's a lot of close quarter fighting at the outset. And here we've got the hoof prints of the horses riding around in between the buildings. There are accounts of the warriors backing their horses up and trying to kick down or push through the doors using their horses. Um, and so here we've got this sort of scene and just the number of bullets being fired, the buildings. I think that's what we're seeing. It's hard to account for the casualty here. There's no one recorded as having died near the blacksmith shop. No one took shelter in the blacksmith shop. There is an account of some accounts of a Mexican teamster who is killed during the battle, and that possibly could be him. But I think given the buildings and the other drawings that appear in this particular ledger, it's a strong possibility that this is a depiction of the attack on the Buffalo Hunters base at Adobe Walls. Another one, and I did not identify this as such, but this is from the same ledger book, another Kiowa drawing from the Shield ledger. And this one has been identified as the Battle of the Buffalo Wallow, which started on September 12th, 1874, in which Billy Dixon, Amos Chapman, and 4 soldiers were surrounded by Kiowas. And there's some things about this that fit that really well, right? The depiction of the wallow. We've got the 4 soldiers here. We don't have the 2 scouts. The horses that are shown dead near the wallow don't fit with the accounts that we have. At the very outset, Private Smith is shot. He was holding all the horses. He lets go of them and they scatter. And that's one of the issues for Dixon and the other men, is that those horses had the ammunition and the water and everything else. This soldier who's depicted outside the wallow would likely be Smith. Later in the engagement, they went out to retrieve his ammunition and weapons and realized he was still alive. And Dixon and Private Wrath actually drag him to the wallow. And so there's some things that fit, some things that don't. My sense is that this is sort of a drawing created based on someone's narrative, right? So perhaps not drawn by a participant, but drawn by someone who's hearing about this story. Couple interesting things to point out here. If you look at this figure on the right, who's charging in with the red body paint and the red sash, this is very, very similar to the way in which Seithainthe or White Bear is depicted. We have other depictions of Seithainthe. But at this time in 1874, if this is the Buffalo Wallow, after he was released from Huntsville for his role in the Warren Wagon Train raid, he actually gives away both his lance, his Zabot, his arrow lance, and his no retreat sash. And so this is likely another figure, possibly Odelpaw, one of his sons, to whom he had given the no retreat sash. The lance was given to a warrior named White Cowbird. So if this is 1874, the paint, the feathers he's wearing in his hair, and that no retreat sash strongly suggests this is one of Seithainthe's sons. The other thing I want to talk about briefly is sort of what we can learn about how the sort of ceremony or ritual that's associated with warfare. This is a drawing that by Kobe, another Fort Marion drawing that I think depicts 2 scouts returning. It's interesting that in the information that Hugh L. Scott collects, people make a point of saying scouts were always sent out in groups of 2, and the scouts always were sent out in 2s. Here you have these 2 men returning. You've got a leader of the war party holding the pipe, and so that pipes are a symbol of leadership. And so often men who are leading a raid will depict themselves holding that pipe as the symbol of their authority. Here you've got everyone assembled and you've got the two men coming in. And it's interesting because one of the Kiowas who spotted Lyman's wagon train and went back to report it left this account. So this is Boat Tali. He said, quote, "As we approached camp, we made our signal by riding in little circles. When we got close, they were waiting for us in line, Mamonti and Lone Wolf standing behind an altar of buffalo chips. Kiowa Bill, who was the older, went forward and received the sage straw in his hair, after which he gave our report," right? So this very formalized way in which the scouts would report, riding in circles to while they're still a distance off to signal that they've spotted the enemy, and then this altar of buffalo chips, and then the placement of the straw, the piece of sage in the scout's hair before he provides his account. So again, not saying that this is a depiction of the scouts reporting spotting Lymans, but it is a depiction of the way in which warfare was conducted by Kiowa people in the late 19th century. This is a depiction of the return of a successful party. What you've got on the left, you can see the lodges and women coming out from the lodges. You see two warriors with scalps suspended from poles. Everyone else is firing guns off as they ride into the village. And this fits very well with what we know from the accounts collected in the late 19th and early 20th century about pre-reservation life. When a party had taken in the life of an enemy without any of the members of the party being killed, this is how they returned to camp. And so they would paint their faces black. Here they're painted blue. Blue and black in these drawings is really interchangeable. So they've all painted their faces black to signal victory. And then as they rode into camp, they would have the trophies, the scalps going ahead of them, and then they're firing the guns off into the air to signal their return. The thing that I think is really interesting about this drawing is if you look at the people returning, there's a woman with the party. And so if you look on the far right, you can see the woman's leggings with the conchos going up her shin, and you can see the monkagoodle, the red sleeve dress, the cloth trade cloth dress that she's wearing. And so this is a woman carrying her husband's shield. And so one of the interesting things when I started delving into these Kiowa drawings, Jack Ewers, the great dean of Plains Art Studies, wrote a piece on women warriors, and he identified 2 or 3 drawings that depict women engaged in warfare. And I think there's at least a dozen or more Kiowa drawings that depict this. And it's not any sort of third gender. It's sort of part and parcel of being a Kiowa woman is going on raids sometimes, and sometimes it's revenge raids. So a woman who had lost a husband, lost a brother, lost a father might accompany the revenge raid. Women sometimes went with their husbands. It was a break from the daily routine. And so sometimes people write about this and they say, well, there were women because someone had to chop the wood and haul the water and take care of the horses. But the Kiowa accounts are really clear that for women, they weren't doing any of those camp chores, that there were young boys who went with the parties who were in charge of all of that, right? So this was a break from those domestic chores. The other thing that you find a lot in the accounts is women who are leaving their husband and sort of eloping or absconding with another man would go off on raids with them. If you think about it, that man is going off on a raid accompanied by his male kinsmen and his friends. So there's some security there, right? If the aggrieved husband follows the party out, he's with his kinsmen and with his friends. And this shows up quite a bit where women would leave their husband and go away with their paramour, so to speak. And I actually published an article on all of these depictions of women because they're quite interesting. Then following the return of the party, there would be scalp and victory dancing. And so these are women who are wearing their male kin's bonnets. So you see the woman with the buffalo horn bonnet, and then a number of women wearing full trailer bonnets and carrying their men's lances. And so this is sort of scalp and victory dancing that would follow the return of the party in celebrating their success. When I do these talks and I'm focused on 19th century drawings, it's really important to me that people don't get the idea that Kiowa people are a thing of the past or Southern Cheyenne people are a thing of the past. There are, vibrant cultures that exist today, and one of the juxtapositions I always like to show is this drawing from between 1875 and 78 of women scalp and victory dancing, and then this photo of Kiowa women today scalp and victory dancing as part of the Kiowa Black Leggings Warrior Society ceremony. And so on the left, that's Vanessa Jennings, Vanessa Palkiagoat Jennings, and then her daughter Summer Morgan on the right. And so it's pretty amazing to see the cultural continuity when you compare this drawing from the 1870s and then these photos from not long ago. And actually at the 150th, the event commemorating the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Lyman's Wagon Train, the Kiowa women scalped in victory dance, and they're going to do the same at Paladuro to sort of, though that battle was not a victory, what they're celebrating is their cultural survival, right? Their persistence, their resilience. And so that'll be something that will happen there at Paladuro, and probably the first time in 150 years since Kiowa people as a group have camped there in Paladuro. The other point I'd like to make is that drawings are still used, art is still used as a medium for recording Kiowa history. This is the Kiowa Black Leggings Warrior Society battle teepee. This was painted in 2008 to mark the 150th anniversary of the revival of the Black Leggings Warrior Society. It's inspired by the teepee with battle pictures that belong to Thahasan, to Little Bluff. He had received that design as a gift in 1845 from a Cheyenne named Sleeping Bear. So in 1840, the Kiowas and the Southern Cheyenne made peace, and in 45, Sleeping Bear gave Thahasan the teepee with battle pictures. And so you've got yellow and black stripes on the south side of the teepee, and then going up the back, the west, up the spine, are the names of all the Kiowa men who have died in U.S. military service. And then battle scenes depicted there on the teepee cover. And so Dixon Palmer created the first battle teepee for the society. He was a World War II veteran, as were his brothers, and that very first version had bombers and German Luftwaffe fighter planes. It had paratroopers and Sherman tanks. This version depicts scenes from the global war on terror. So this depiction that stands for both Kiowas who served in Iraq as well as Afghanistan. And then if you look, those helicopters up there are Kiowa Scout helicopters. So they actually had Kiowa Scout helicopters fly in for the dance. And sort of their Kiowa people are very proud that helicopter carries the tribe's name. Here's Sherman Chattleson's depiction of World War I trench fighting during World War I. There's also a drawing that depicts that 1864 first battle of Adobe Walls. So all of this to say that Kiowa people continue today to sort of honor their warriors. This warrior ethos that I was talking about at the beginning, persists today. Kiowa veterans are very highly respected within Kiowa society, and Kiowas continue to use art as a medium for celebrating their martial prowess and their bravery. So with that, I want to make sure we leave time for questions. So I'm gonna stop there, and I'd be happy to talk about any of this. So thank you all.
Thank you so much. That was a fantastic presentation. If anyone has any questions, you are welcome to unmute, or you can also put them in the chat, and I will read those off. Aaron.
I presume that there are ledger drawings, et cetera, depicting Sand Creek Massacre.
I am not aware of any. And here is the thing that typically these drawings are celebratory, right? In that they're depicting an individual's deeds. By and large, Kiowa, Plains people in general, but Kiowa and Southern Cheyenne people shied away from depicting loss of their own people's lives. So it's not unprecedented. There are a few, but there are very few drawings that depict Cheyenne or Kiowa as casualties. One of the ones that I'm working on a paper now, there's actually a Cheyenne book at the Nebraska State Historical Society, and it is or State History Museum, and it was striking to me the number of Cheyenne casualties in that book. And I kind of set out to try to figure out what engagement is this, because it was very unusual. And what was interesting, eventually I was able to nail it down, and it depicts Mackenzie's attack on Morning Stars Village. So Mackenzie's attack on Dull Nice Village in 1876. But yeah, I'm not, to my knowledge, I'm not aware of drawings. There are contemporary drawings by contemporary ledger artists commemorating Sand Creek. But to my knowledge, no historic drawings that we've been able to identify as depicting actions during the Sand Creek massacre.
Thank you. That is a very logical explanation, and I just wondered why I don't see more of it. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And Scott had a question in the chat. Excellent presentation. How do these Kiowa and Cheyenne drawings compare and contrast to accounts from military sources, military sources and reports of these battles? Are there glaring differences or similarities?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, often there are they match up really well. Like I didn't have time. We were focusing on the Southern Plains tonight, but going back to those Cheyenne drawings of the attack on Dull Nice Village, it is amazing how well they match up, because in that engagement, one of the cavalry troops charged right up to the edge of a ravine, at which point the Cheyennes in the ravine fired on them, and they kind of wheeled to the right and retreated, and you see that in the drawings, the way the horses, the hoof prints are, and you see we've been able to match up from the military side. There were actually Cheyenne scouts who were fighting with Mackenzie against the Cheyenne in Dull Nice Village, and the scouts that are shown firing into that ravine have name glyphs. And when you match the name glyphs depicted in the drawings to the records for the scouts, they match up. And that's actually, it was the way that I was able to sort of definitively say this is the attack on Morning Stars Village, because you had this mix of cavalry troopers and Indian scouts, and the Indian scouts had name glyphs. When I went to the list of Cheyennes who were scouting for Mackenzie in that engagement, they match up perfectly. Sometimes there are, I think, is, for example, the one of the Buffalo Wallow, right? I do think that that's a depiction of the Buffalo Wallow fight, but there are four soldiers depicted, not four soldiers plus two scouts, right? The horses are shown dead right by the Buffalo Wallow. If they were that close, those men could have gone out and gotten ammunition, right? So I think it depends on if these are drawings made by someone who was there, or are they drawings of someone depicting a story that they're hearing, right? It is interesting to me. I've looked at a lot of Cheyenne drawings. And once you start looking at, one of the things I'm a big advocate of is typically what scholars do is we look at one set of drawings, and then we write an article or we write a book about that set of drawings. And I think when that's our unit of analysis, we miss the relationship between these drawings, right? So I've tried really hard to sort of look at the Keeling Ledger from Nebraska State Museum and the Cheyenne books we have from the Smithsonian. And what I find is some of the same deeds are depicted. It's very clear that this is the same individual performing the same deed. And then we can kind of look at what changes, right? But often it's amazing how much continuity there is between these drawings. So I think often, like at Lyman's, it matches up really well with both, Captain Lyman's reports, Second Lieutenant West's diary, with the archaeology. And so I think, there's another example. This is not matching up with the military accounts, but there is a drawing of Seithinthe giving away the Zabot, passing the Zabot in his no retreat sash on to other men. And what's amazing to me is when I saw that drawing, and you go to which was made between 75 and 78 at Fort Marion, then you go to the 1935 field notes, Weston LaBar's field notes, when they interviewed Kiowas, and there's a Kiowa elder who talked about seeing that, and her description of what happened in this drawing that was made over 50 years earlier just fit together so seamlessly. So I think I have a lot of confidence in the drawings, especially if we know who drew them and whether or not they were sort of firsthand witnesses.
Okay, there's another question in the chat. What is a Zabat?
Zabot. Okay.
There you go.
So it's a arrow lance. So it's a very distinctive looking lance that looks like a 6 foot long arrow. So it has fletching at the top, like an arrow, and it was a particular kind of lance. There were Seithinthe or White Bear. That name's often anglicized as Satanta, but he possessed one. There was another individual that possessed one. But Seithinthe gave his to White Cowbird, who would eventually be killed by the Texas Rangers during a hunting expedition. He had pursued a deer that he had shot across the Red River and was attacked by the Texas Rangers. So, yeah.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
I think in the article, the last article of yours that I read, you were talking about cousins or brothers who were helping each other out when you mentioned a little bit, but you didn't really go in.
Society comb. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when men were inducted into the warrior societies, they were inducted with a society brother. The word for that is comb. And those men like sort of stayed together and like considered themselves to be family. And so, I think sometimes probably when they're sending out two scouts, I often think they're sending out those society brothers together. But those men would dance together. And so, for example, and this persisted, for example, Charlie Whitehorse, who is the bustle keeper for the Omaha Society, old man Naho was his society comb. And so sometimes even when men if they move from one warrior society to another, often they would like move together, or at times would move together. So yeah, that was an important sort of Kiowa institution.
Yeah, but these weren't age graded, were they?
No, but except for Hawaii or Rabbit Society, the kids society, boys society, and Adulta Yui seems to be somewhat age graded because they're younger men. But then like Black Leggings and Taipei Society are not, right? And then you have people recruited out of those into Quite Sanko, and Meadows does a great job of sort of unpacking all of the society sort of structure and the officer structure for those. But we often like hear of the Quite Sanko as the 10 bravest men, and it gives us this idea that there's only 10 men in the society, but really there's 10 sash owners. Each of those sash owners has a comb and they share that sash, so that's 20. Then there's like junior members, so it's actually a much bigger society than just the 10 men that have the sash, right? There's some great ledger drawings of that society, and you see the man wearing the sash and then his comb holding the end of the sash as they're dancing. So yeah.
I'm curious. I mean, I understand what you're doing in terms of working within that historical context, and it's amazing the kind of information that you're pulling out of that. But at the same time, it seems to me like when I read your article, you also had at least kind of dipped into the concept of the twin heroes in mythology. And I was wondering if you had pursued that. I
I
mean,
haven't I haven't really pursued that. I mean, I think that there's interesting stuff. Like one of the things that continues to sort of interest me, and I don't know what to sort of attribute it to, but is like the Kiowa preference or aesthetic for uh things like bilateral asymmetry is like a big thing in Kiowa beadwork, right? So like you'll get like cradle boards and the two sides are different colors. Sometimes, often there are two different background colors on women's boots. A lot of times the design on top of the foot can either be the same design in different colors or totally different designs, right? Or men's moccasins, the two lanes of beadwork on the top, they're always different, right? Like the inside lanes match and the outside lanes match, and the cuffs are beaded different, the inside cuff, and you get it in a lot of things. But it's interesting to me that sort of preference for asymmetry, right? Of not things not matching and being
uh-huh.
symmetrical. I don't know what to attribute that to, but it's something that sort of interests me because it's definitely an aesthetic there. It was something that when I wrote a Recovering Voices grant for the Smithsonian, and we went to the Smithsonian to, took a research team from the Kiowa to the Smithsonian. It was interesting because one of the things they said over and over again is how different that early, that late 19th, early 20th century aesthetic is from sort of the powwow aesthetic today, right? Where everything matches, right? It's all the same background color. It's the same designs on your crown, on your purse, on your, and it was really interesting because people were saying, this is something that we want to bring back, right? Is that everything shouldn't match, right? That it's beautiful. There's a certain beauty when things are unique, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not uniform.
Well, that's kind of where the twin heroes come in. I mean, these two brothers, uh, actually, Paul Radin really got into this stuff, and he maintains that these are the basic uh, story in many, many indigenous societies that they play off each other. It's like the basic story is, of course, uh, that the father goes off to hunt, and while he's gone, even though he warns his wife, who is pregnant, not to go out and don't, get involved with other people. And this guy shows up and she drops her guard and he kills her, and then throws one into the water and then throws the other one in the teepee somewhere where he's hidden. But the whole point is that the one that's in the water is representing the underworld, while the other one is in this world. And so these two brothers, they know that they are related, but they didn't really interact too much, but they did come together. And
Yeah,
they,
there's really beautiful, if anyone ever visits the Kiowa, Tribal Museum, there are some really beautiful murals that Parker Boydell painted. And so at the tribal complex, there are 10 murals that each three artists worked with the elders on. And so Parker Boydell, Merritt Creeping Bear, and Sherman Chattelson. And so they each painted three beautiful murals, and then they all collaborated on the last one. And so three of those murals, I think three, relate to those stories.
heroes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because basically they make the world safe for humans, and
Yeah.
that's what that's all about. But yeah, I'd love to see those.
Yeah,
'Cause
they're beautiful. They are like absolutely breathtaking. And so
where is their museum?
in Carnegie, yeah. So the Kiowa Tribal Headquarters is located in Carnegie, Oklahoma, and the
Uh-huh.
museum is there at the tribal complex. And yeah, no, they've done a fantastic job. And the murals really are something to see because they're sort of, we're created with the elders sort of narrating these stories and accounts, and then sort of through the artists, like the artists then interpreting them on canvas. And so there's three that are sort of the like origin story and the split boys, and then three that are sort of up north and coming south, and then Sherman's three are sort of the Indian Wars period, reservation life and things like that. So yeah, no, they're definitely wonderful thing to behold.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. Um, I know that our changing climate is impacting a lot of tribes, and such that the Naisha, hope I'm saying that correctly, formerly known as Kiowa Apache, uh, are having to postpone their dances because of the heat.
Mhm.
And is that how's that playing with the 4th of July and
The
various?
Kiowas haven't moved the fourth. Black leggings happens in October. And so, one of the things that working with members of the Apache tribe of Oklahoma, Plains Apache people, one of the things that comes up is sort of plant gathering, right? And like I have a student who's working on sort of like how you know the sort of mapping traditional plant use and sort of where are those plants available,
Mhm.
and sort of some of the challenges that arise for tribes, especially tribes in Oklahoma, right, where there was allotment, and so there's not a huge land base, and where do tribes gather these plants? And I've
Mhm.
had people express concern about gathering plants in the right of way of the highway, and you don't know what's been sprayed on those plants, right? You don't know what was sprayed on the field on the other side of the fence. And so one of the things that's interesting is the Park Service has new plant gathering regs where they allow they allow is not the right word, where they enter into agreements with the tribes, for the tribes to harvest traditional plants
Mhm.
at the parks. And so that's kind of an interesting thing that's emerged.
Yeah, I would think there's a lot of overlap between the Apaches and the Kiowas in terms of plant use.
Yeah, and I mean Julie Jordan produced
Right.
like her excellent ethnobotany of the Plains Apache, and then more recently a Kiowa tribal member has uh, done an ethnobotanical study for the Kiowa. So yeah, there's good work going on in that area.
Mhm. I understand Judy's still alive, at least I hope so, but her health is starting to fade out.
Yeah, no,
And
she did amazing work. Like
yeah.
I leaned very heavily on her publication when I was doing some work for the Park Service, looking at
Hmm. Hmm.
traditional use studies.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt here, but I think that's about all the time we have for questions. But I really appreciate you coming to join us here tonight, Dr. Jordan. It was very good to see you again. Um, and I guess we'll get started with the business meeting for anyone who wants to stay.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. And again, if you're interested, the flyer for the Memorial Dance on September 28th is in the chat. And if you'll check out TTU Humanities Center's website, they'll have a list of the upcoming talks and events being hosted by Tech. So thank you all again and have a wonderful night. Appreciate it. It was good seeing everyone.